Last Monday evening, Father Greg Boyle of Homeboy Industries in Los Angeles spoke at Holy Communion. About a third of the way through his talk, he said something that was intentionally provocative. You know, we need a better God than the one we have. The balance of Father Boyle's talk was a spiritual reflection on the harsh realities of life in neighborhoods that are dominated by street gangs. He spoke of gun violence, of domestic abuse, and of what he calls a lethal absence of hope. We need a better God than one who would allow this, he implied. We need a better God than the one we have. On nights like Maundy Thursday, I understand what he means. We have gathered in this room tonight to reenact a tender moment between Jesus and his disciples. Bread and wine were shared, and the teacher washed the feet of his students. We can imagine the warm glow of a candlelit room, the crisp sound of a crackling fire, and the rich smell of Middle Eastern food. The moment is quite nearly perfect, but the shadow of a cross lingers like a specter over our table. We all know what happens next. The disciples all know what happens next. Everyone knows what happens next, and none of us want to think about it. We're not willing to relax into the beauty of this night because we know that the warmth is about to give way to a bitter cold, that light is about to give way to deep darkness, and that beauty is about to give way to the ghastly recollection of a lynching too horrific even to describe. We need a better God than this. We want a God who will just let us stay seated at the table and who will let the bitter cup pass. We want a God who will intervene to prevent suffering and to block betrayal. In St. Matthew's Gospel, Jesus says that he could appeal to his Father who would send 12 legions of angels to rescue him. We want a God who would do exactly that. Instead, we have a God who tells Peter to put away his sword. We have a God who prizes forgiveness over retribution. We have a God who walks willingly into the valley of the shadow of death and who bids us to follow him there. For those who want to save their life will lose it, he says. And those who lose their life for my sake will find it. Yet the God that we want is not the God that we need. The God who would intervene so that none of us ever have to suffer is the same God who would have taken himself down from the cross. The God who would let us hold on to all our hatred and malice and frustration and anger is the same God who would have had Peter draw his sword. Father Boyle concludes that our God has loved us without measure and without regret, but that too often we settle for a partial God, a lesser God, a more realistic and practical God than the God we actually have. To put it another way, we settle for the God that we want and not the God that we need. God does not seek to make the world the place that we want it to be, but rather the place that he wants it to be. St. Paul prayed that the mind of God would be in us, not the other way around. Our measure of God's greatness cannot be his willingness to do exactly what we ask of him, Our measure of God's greatness is and must remain the standard of discipleship that he sets for us. God's invitation and inspiration is to live for something that is greater than ourselves, something that will endure beyond our present moment. Jesus says, "Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another." Christ's love began in humility and vulnerability and expressed itself in generosity. Christ's new commandment is that we do the same. As I imagine Jesus washing his disciples' feet, I also imagine him looking up at them with reassuring eyes. Everything's going to be okay. As I imagine Jesus sitting at table with the people he loves the most, I imagine a great "I love you" written all over his face. Here, take this. This bread is my body. It's my gift for you. Eat it and remember. Tonight, our Lord Jesus Christ prepares to walk a road of unimaginable suffering, and he does it on behalf of us all. He shares his great love with us and asks only that we proceed to share it with others. He offers us what Father Boyle calls his tender glance, and he waits to see how we will glance at others. Amen.